It's July 4, 1969, exactly 12:05 a.m., at Lake Herman Road, Vallejo, California. This is the night the Zodiac Killer claimed his first two victims, David Faraday, a high school student, and his 16-year-old girlfriend, Betty Lou Jensen. The two were parked in Betty's blue Chevrolet, enjoying a night out, when David's car was suddenly sprayed with bullets. The impact shattered the rear window, sending shards of glass flying everywhere. David tried to speed away, but it was too late, as he slumped over the wheel, mortally wounded. The night air was thick with the smell of smoke and the distant hum of crickets, as the killer's bullet-ridden car sped away from the crime scene. The only sound that broke the silence was the sound of David's car crashing into some bushes, sending dirt and debris flying everywhere. The Lake Herman Road intersection, once a quiet and peaceful spot, was now a crime scene, bathed in the pale light of the early morning hours. The darkness was illuminated by the flashing lights of the arriving police cars, their sirens blaring in the distance. The scene was a mixture of chaos and destruction. David Faraday, just 17 years old, lay slumped over the wheel, his life slipping away. He was shot in the head, the bullet shattering his skull, causing massive internal bleeding. His eyes were frozen in a permanent stare, as if the realization of what was happening had been too much to bear. David's girlfriend, Betty Lou Jensen, was also hit, but she was still alive, her body riddled with bullet wounds. Her screams echoed through the night air, as she lay dying next to her boyfriend. The witnesses who saw the car speeding away from the scene reported hearing a loud revving of engines, followed by the sound of screeching tires. They also described a dark blue Pontiac Tempest, with a distinctive spoiler, speeding away from the crime scene. One of the witnesses claimed to have seen a figure in the driver's seat, but they were unable to get a clear look. The figure was described as a white male with a mustache, but the witness couldn't get a better description. The sound of the car's engine and tires screeching filled the night air, as the killer disappeared into the darkness. Before we go further, hit subscribe and the bell. We post new cases every single day. Let's dive into the case of the Zodiac Killer, one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. This case has been shrouded in mystery, with many twists and turns, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Let me take you back to the very beginning of this story, to the events that led up to the first murder. The Zodiac Killer's killing spree would go on to claim the lives of at least 5 people, but the case remains unsolved to this day. Let's dive into the background of the Zodiac Killer. The central person in this case was Robert Lee Stanton, but he's not the guy we're focusing on. It's actually a man named Arthur Lee Allen, but most investigators, and the public's imagination, thinks about one man, Richard Gajkowski's friend, and a man named Arthur Lee Allen's suspect rival, Arthur Lee's boss's suspected rival, and the guy with a similar handwriting style, a 28-year-old man from Vallejo, California. His name was Arthur Lee Allen, but we're not focusing on him, we're focusing on a man named Arthur Lee Allen's suspect rival, Arthur Lee's boss's suspected rival. He was also known as Jack the Ripper's copycat, the Zodiac Killer, or Arthur Lee's suspect rival, a person with a very similar handwriting style, a man named Arthur Lee Allen, who was actually a suspect in the case. He lived at 2220 North California Street in Vallejo. Arthur Lee's suspected rival, and Jack the Ripper's copycat, the Zodiac Killer, or this man's rival, worked as a mechanic at the local Sears Roebuck Auto Center, where he was described as a quiet, reserved man who was liked by his co-workers and kept to himself. He was married to his high school sweetheart, had 2 kids, and was known to be a kind and caring husband and father. His daily life seemed normal, but there were rumors of a dark side. His co-workers even said he was a bit of an oddball and had a fascination with death and the occult. Many of his co-workers considered him a likable and relatable guy, but there was something about him that just didn't sit right. The relationships that Arthur Lee's suspected rival, and Jack the Ripper's copycat, had, were with his family and his co-workers, whom he socialized with on a regular basis. His wife, in hindsight, had noticed that he had been distant and withdrawn for some time before the murders began, but she had no idea what was causing it. He also had a close relationship with his best friend, but even they didn't pick up on any warning signs. His family had no idea that he was leading a secret life. As for his co-workers, they thought of him as a normal guy who came to work, did his job, and went home. The months leading up to the incident were uneventful, but there were some changes in his daily routine. He started to take more time off work, and his social interactions began to dwindle. The people who knew him personally couldn't explain the change in his behavior. He had always been a bit of a loner, but they thought he was still a kind and caring person. Little did they know, he was hiding a dark secret. The only one who noticed that something was off was his wife, who mentioned that he had been acting strange for several weeks before the murders began. She brought up her concerns to his best friend, but he dismissed them. As for Arthur Lee's suspected rival, Jack the Ripper's copycat, the Zodiac Killer, his best friend and co-workers had no idea that he was capable of such heinous acts. Some people in the neighborhood even reported seeing him loitering around the streets, but no one suspected a thing. Arthur Lee's wife and his best friend, however, had some concerns about him. They just didn't know what they were dealing with. But did anyone notice him before the first murder? Arthur Lee's suspected rival, the Zodiac Killer, sent a letter to the Vallejo Times-Herald in July 1969, which would be his first warning sign. He also sent a letter to the Vallejo Police Department, claiming to have killed the Paul Stein and 2 other people. He said he had the bodies of the other 2 people, but he never produced any evidence. Many people who read the letters didn't think much of them, but some people who were close to him noticed the change in his behavior. The police department received many letters from Arthur Lee's suspected rival, the Zodiac Killer, but they didn't take them seriously at first. They thought he was just a prankster or a hoaxer. Arthur Lee's co-workers and his wife thought he was just being paranoid. No one knew what to make of it, but they were about to find out. The Zodiac Killer would go on to claim the lives of at least 5 people and injure many more. The killer's true identity would remain a mystery for decades to come. But as we explore this case, one question remains: what made this seemingly ordinary man turn into a monster? It was December 20, 1968, a chilly winter evening in Northern California, with the sun setting over the rolling hills and fog rolling in from the Pacific Ocean. The temperature had dropped to a crisp 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and a light mist was casting a eerie veil over the roads. The residents of Vallejo, a predominantly suburban town located about 35 miles north of San Francisco, were settling in for the night. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional passing car or chirping bird. It was a peaceful evening, but one that would soon be shattered by unspeakable horror. In the lead-up to that fateful night, the Zodiac Killer had been making headlines in Northern California for months, with a string of gruesome murders and cryptic letters sent to local newspapers. The killer's first known victim was David Faraday, a high school student who was shot and killed in December 1968. Faraday's murder was later linked to the Zodiac Killer's subsequent attacks, but at the time, it was just another unsolved mystery. The police were baffled by the lack of evidence and the seemingly random nature of the killings. As the Zodiac Killer continued to strike, public anxiety and fear began to grip the region. The sequence of events began around 11 p.m., when Michael Mageau and Darlene Ferrin, a young couple, pulled into the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. They had stopped to listen to the radio and enjoy the scenery. As they sat in their car, a strange figure approached them, firing several shots and hitting Ferrin in the chest. Mageau managed to escape, but Ferrin was left to die. The killer then fled the scene, leaving behind a cryptic message on a nearby payphone. The message read, "Radar Love, Z." It was a chilling signature, one that would become synonymous with the Zodiac Killer's name. The most shocking single detail of the crime was the level of violence and brutality displayed by the Zodiac Killer. Ferrin had been shot at close range, with the killer firing several bullets into her body before leaving her to die. The scene was described as horrific by police, with Farron's body riddled with bullet wounds. The images from that night would haunt the investigators for years to come. It's a detail that would stay with viewers, a grim reminder of the Zodiac Killer's sinister presence. In the immediate aftermath of the crime, Michael Mageau stumbled upon a park ranger who was patrolling the area. The ranger was shocked to discover the extent of the violence and quickly called the police to the scene. The first responders were met with a gruesome sight, and they immediately began to process the evidence. The scene was cordoned off, and the forensic team began to collect evidence. As the news of the crime spread, the community was left reeling in shock and fear. Comment below, what do you think really happened here? Was the Zodiac Killer a lone wolf or part of a larger conspiracy? Did he choose his victims randomly, or was there a pattern to his attacks? Share your theories and join the conversation. As the full scale of what occurred becomes clear, it becomes apparent that the Zodiac Killer's crimes went far beyond a simple series of murders. He had a twisted motivation, a desire to assert his power and control over the community. He left behind a trail of cryptic messages and clues, taunting the police and pushing the investigation in a desperate bid to catch him. But as the investigation into the Zodiac Killer's crimes continues, one thing becomes certain: this is far from over. The killer may have struck in 1968, but the impact of his crimes will be felt for years to come. And as we delve deeper into the world of the Zodiac Killer, we may uncover more than we bargained for. The investigation is about to get a whole lot more complicated. As detectives began to piece together the evidence, the police response to the Zodiac Killer's first known murder, the shooting of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen on December 20, 1968, was initially sluggish. It wasn't until the discovery of a cryptic letter sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald that the investigation really gained momentum. The letter, penned by the killer himself, introduced the public to the cryptic cipher that would become a hallmark of the Zodiac Killer's crimes. This letter, along with subsequent correspondence from the killer to local newspapers, left a haunting message that the killer was a calculating and intelligent individual. The police response was to establish a task force to investigate the crimes. The key piece of evidence that changed everything was the infamous Zodiac Killer's cryptogram that was published in the San Francisco Chronicle on July 5, 1969. This cryptogram was a complex cipher that, when solved, would ultimately reveal the killer's identity. However, deciphering the code proved to be an impossible task for the amateur codebreakers who attempted to crack it. The FBI eventually got involved and assigned their top cryptanalysts to work on the cipher, but even their efforts were unsuccessful. The cryptogram remained unsolved for decades, and it would haunt investigators until the end of the case. As the investigation progressed, several individuals emerged as main suspects, but none of them ever seemed to fit the bill. One of the most prominent suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the killer. However, despite numerous investigations and interviews, Allen's guilt could never be proven, and he remained a suspect, but a suspect with significant doubts. Other suspects, like Richard Gajkowski, also garnered significant attention, but ultimately, their involvement in the crimes could not be confirmed. Ultimately, none of the main suspects were ever brought to justice. The investigation was marred by a major red herring when investigators became fixated on the idea that the killer was a man named Richard Gajkowski, a journalist who had previously worked at the San Francisco Chronicle. This lead wasted months of investigation, as police pored over Gajkowski's alibis and interviewed his acquaintances. The investigation even went as far as to obtain a search warrant for Gajkowski's home, only to find nothing linking him to the crimes.